So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, I just got this down from upstairs," meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran." This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq.
My fellow citizens, at this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger.
And then Syria.
We had a chance to talk about a wide range of international issues, including the situation in Syria. And I have to say that all of us who've been seeing the terrible pictures coming out of Syria and Homs recently recognize it is absolutely imperative for the international community to rally and send a clear message to President Assad that it is time for a transition, it is time for that regime to move on, and it is time to stop the killing of Syrian citizens by their own government.
Lebanon.
They both had different reasons, the State Department and the White House, for wanting Israel to do it, encouraging them to do it, supporting them. Our Air Force worked very closely with the Israeli Air Force for months before this, not necessarily with a deadline, knowing when it would happen. It was always going to be whenever there was an incident, they would take advantage of an incident. The word I used was fortunate timing. When Hezbollah grabbed some of the Israeli soldiers in early July, that was then a pretext, I think that's the only word, for a major offensive that had been in the works a long time.
Libya.
Today we can definitively say that the Gaddafi regime has come to an end. The last major regime strongholds have fallen. The new government is consolidating the control over the country, and one of the world's longest-serving dictators is no more.
Somalia.
Well, violence isn't only on the rise in Afghanistan. In fact, it looks like America's shadow wars have now increased by 1. Drone strikes have long been reported in Pakistan and Yemen, but now there's news that a week ago, a U.S. drone aircraft fired on 2 leaders of the Somalian organization Al-Shabaab.
Sudan.
President Obama is sending 100 combat-equipped troops to Central Africa to advise local forces on getting rid of one of the continent's most vicious operatives, Joseph Kony, the head of the Lord's Resistance Army, a group responsible for atrocities across the region. It's the first open deployment of U.S. ground combat power to Africa since the Black Hawk Down incident in Somalia in the 1990s that killed 18 troops. U.S. troops may wind up now in Uganda, South Sudan, the Central African Republic, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. It's part of a growing military effort to engage in Africa.
Finishing off Iran.
I'm proud to support Israel, America's longtime friend and ally in the Middle East. It's time we took a stand for Israel by standing up to the enemies of Israel.
The shepherd boy who stood up before the great warrior of the Philistines. Young David having all the courage. There must be someone somewhere. There must be someone. There's got somebody somewhere that cares.
دمار يخلفه الجيش الإسرائيلي في كل شبر من الضفة الغربية. مدينة السلام المحاصرة لا زالت ترفع غصن الزيتون، وكنيسة المهد تقصف بالآليات العسكرية. 200 مواطن محاصرون داخل الكنيسة دون طعام أو دواء، فلا يتورعون عن إطلاق النار على كل شيء يمر أمامهم بمن فيهم الصحفيين. بيوت مهدمة وطرق مدمرة وسيارات لم يعد يظهر منها إلا هياكلها. أما الطعام والدواء فوجوده نادرا.
سجود احمد تركي. ليش هذا شوي بدنا يبين الدم. خليك اكتب يلا لكن يلا في عندك في اللفت في كوميديوتي ممكن ندخله هيك اليوم. جميل الله يرحم والله يرحم.
Evil folks still lurk out there.
Our goal is to defend the American people, to eliminate Iraq's weapons of mass destruction, to secure Iraq's oil fields, liberate the Iraqi people.
Liberate the people of Iraq, people whose lives we care about. The day of freedom is drawing near.
Where is the voice
we suffer political oppression, economic exploitation, and social degradation, all of them from the same enemy.
It is useless and futile for us to continue talking peace and non-violence against the government whose reply is only savage attack on an unarmed, defenseless people.
This year will be a year of violence. This year is the keynote is violence and the slogan is attack.
What is expected of us? What should we do? We should defend our country in the best possible manner.
To give further substance to this mass deception, and ultimately to defend the privileged status quo against its own oppressed people, for the minority regime, military preparedness is a top priority. South African troops are tough, well-trained, and confident of their superiority, allaying white fear about internal strife and the threat of external aggression. Local production of military hardware by South Africa's Arms Corps has enabled the South African Defence Force to build up a formidable arsenal of sophisticated weapons, tailor-made for guerrilla warfare. South Africa now possesses one of the world's deadliest artillery systems, and the NATO publication 15 Nations reviewed the latest G6 gun as one of the finest of its kind in the world. At a cost of 8.5 million rand per day, this formidable military machine has more kill power than the total military might of sub-Saharan Black Africa. Obsessed by the illusion of the total onslaught, this show of invincible might offers the guarantee of continued white supremacy and black exclusion from meaningful participation in the political decision-making process of South Africa.
Let us also salute those who have fallen and those who continue to buy freedom with their lives.
Political apartheid ended in 1994. Nelson Mandela and the ANC were swept into power in South Africa's first democratic elections. But victory was not so simple or so easy. A year earlier, while negotiating the transition to democracy, the ANC signed its first World Bank loan and began a program of structural adjustment. The new constitution was the most progressive in the world, guaranteeing the human right to water, housing, and electricity. But under the influence of the IMF, the ANC privatized all three, creating 8 million homeless in South Africa and cutting off water and electricity to tens of thousands of families every month. The apartheid state was defeated, but nothing changed. The economy was still in the hands of the same global system.
Occupation, curfew, settlement, administrative detention, preemptive strike, terrorist infrastructure, attrition, transfer. Their war destroys language, speaks genocide with the words of a quiet technician. Occupation means that you cannot trust the open sky or any open street beneath the gaze of their sniper towers. It means that you cannot trust the future or have faith that the past will always be there. Occupation means you live out your life under military rule and the constant threat of death. A quick death from a sniper's bullet or a rocket attack from an F-16, a crushing, suffocating death beneath the rubble of a bulldozed building, a slow, bleeding death in an ambulance held for hours at a checkpoint, a dark death on the torture tables of an Israeli prison, a random, arbitrary death as their tanks spray a crowd with machine gun fire, a cold, calculated death from malnutrition and curable diseases, 1,000 small deaths as you watch your family die around you. Occupation means that every day you die, and the world watches in silence, as if your death were nothing, as if it were a stone falling to the earth, or water falling over water. And if you face all of this death and indifference, and keep your humanity and your love and your dignity, and refuse to surrender to their terror and despair, then you know something of the courage.
Until we decided to stop being afraid. We walked, and in every place the war looked different. In some places it killed with bullets and bombs, and others with hunger and neglect. In some places it worked through global institutions and agencies, and others through local thugs and profiteers. Corporate globalization, neoliberalism, empire. The logic that this violence served was called different things in different places, but everywhere it was the same. It was fragmentation, isolation, fear. It was the rule of money and the market extending itself over every inch of the planet and every aspect of our lives. We walked, and days came that ripped these streets open. Days when the war was not a story they told us. Days when the war was here, under our feet.
Ironic thing is that in 1994 we did not end racism. Our idea of reconciliation meant that we did not address the historical question which shapes racism, the land question. 20 years later, only about 7% of the land has gone back to black people. The issue of transformation of the labor market, the issue of poverty, the issue of even the housing where black people live, we continue to exist as it was under apartheid. The ANC, to make things worse, has provided services to black people which are sometimes inferior to those that were provided by the apartheid regime. The housing, RDP house, you must go look at one of those things. So the truth of the matter is structurally, South Africa remains anti-black because black people suffer in South Africa. That is why when workers in Marikana demanded a living wage, the ANC sent in the police and massacred them instead of... And that was done to protect white capital. That was done to protect white capital. That was done to protect the interest of the ANC leadership, which has joined white capital to oppress black people.
The Americans, Germans, Canadians, who had so much invested in keeping us miles under the ground, digging our gold and diamonds, they found out that their shares were at risk. Right? Because the mine workers were organizing themselves. And so they went to the ANC, who's been in bed with the communists for all that time, and he says, are you willing to manage our business? What's your business? South Africa. And they said, sure. So now our government is in fact the farm managers. I'm a field nigger. You see, South Africa's a farm.
But there will be 100 houses going to be evicted today. Wow. And that's why the people protest today.
People has been patient for 400 years. They expected 1994 to be the end of that 400 years of patience. They thought that Freedom Charter would exist in South Africa, but it does not exist. People in South Africa are still waiting for a revolution that didn't happen. And there's people that's angry. I think it was a slap in my face, and everybody that died for this cause, I think it's a slap in their face. I think it's a slap in their forefathers' face. I think it's a slap in their children's faces. Because these people sacrifice not only their time, their effort, and their commitment, but also their lives.
Step the fuck back.
everybody from the Archbishop to senior government officials said to us, never again, will apartheid happen on our soil, never again. We also call, never again, but we're not going to not face the reality that the never again is happening today. For us, never again is serious. We live with it. We can't go anywhere without carrying our history with us. But we don't want our history to destroy us. We want our history to be a place on which we can build a future that we all share something special inside of.